and welcome. This is a special project that is connected to some fond childhood memories for me. Have you ever heard of the game called Chrono Trigger? It was developed by Squaresoft. Yes, you heard that right, Squaresoft. The same RPG powerhouse company that made the Final Fantasy games. The media, that same company. That would later merge and become another company called Square Enix. Chrono Trigger was released for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System in America in 1995. The gaming scene in America at that time was different from what we know it to be today. Gamers weren't as united. There wasn't any net connectivity in any of the games. You weren't online. You weren't talking to your friends. It was just you, the glow of your TV, and some pixels. Of course, that kind of sounds lonely, but not so much at the time. For many gamers like myself, RPG games were like a novel, only you got to play the hero. You got to learn and discover the story and even help mold it depending on your actions. That was thrilling and addictive at the time. Gamers also talk about some of the games from their childhood. And the interesting part is, back then, games weren't so hyped either. And of course that means that how we found out about them was different. Whenever a new game came out, I found out about it at school or from a gaming magazine or from any other child magazine. Even comic books, they had game advertisements in them. You didn't see game ads on TV as much. There were some, but it had to be an established title. I remember the first time I saw a Final Fantasy game advertisement. It was in a magazine, a gaming magazine. I don't remember which one, but I remember seeing the art that they put on there and thinking, man, that's amazing. And of course the game was pretty good too. Because of the limited way that games were advertised, Chrono Trigger didn't do well right away. It didn't premiere with no fanfare, and no one really expected much from it here in America. Even though it was developed and its characters were created by Akira Toriyama. You may have heard of the name, the creator of Dragon Ball and the Dragon Ball series. So the art looked the same, but yet, even still, back when these games were popular, Dragon Ball was also not as popular with the younger generations. It did pretty well in Japan though, because Dragon Ball was pretty famous there. In a Super Nintendo game, you got a lot of pixels. It's a style that they had to use. Games were much smaller back then. They didn't have the pixel compression or the technology or the consoles that could handle these kinds of games. So of course they all look retro, and back then that was cutting edge. It was okay. Some people prefer that even today. There were no cinematic cutscenes that would later come even a couple of years from then, from the time it released. There were already some people working on this stuff, but they hadn't switched from cartridge to disc yet. And with the addition of disc as the new way for consoles to go, it really changed the way games were built and how much space they had to play with. Still, Squaresoft, because it wasn't Square Enix yet, they had made something that was unique. Of course, the game would later be updated and be released for the PlayStation 1 the same year as the sequel came out. The sequel called Chrono Cross. The Nintendo DS would later get a copy of the game, and of course the Nintendo App Store would have incarnations of it occur on multiple consoles later on. This also was the first time I'd experienced a game that had a personal character timer. Each character had their own timer that allowed them to change when they got to attack. It would later become a staple in Final Fantasy games, but back then, this was kind of new. The character Frog, which is my depiction, was the fourth character I encountered at the time and discovered that he was the hardest hitting at that particular time, well, with physical attacks. I remember how he would pump his biceps every time the battle would end. It stuck out in my memory. I didn't forget it. I wanted to see if I could capture that look, the look I remembered. I could have overcomplicated the image, could have made it more realistic, but the more I headed the way of a realistic design, my artistic instincts kept telling me not to go to that level, that I would lose the feel. I think the end result turned out just where it should be, to keep the frog a noble knight and an amphibian, because over-realism would focus so much on the fact that he wasn't a human, but a humanoid, that you would lose the sight that he was actually someone of noble design. Chrono Trigger, its sequel, of course, Chrono Cross, had new characters and a new lineup, and the graphics were different because it came out on a console that had a disc design. And of course, there are fans who love both, or one of each of the games, and the fandom collectively wanted more Chrono games in general. They were so dedicated that they secretly worked on a sequel despite several hints from Squaresoft and Square Enix that there may be future games. They even copyrighted some titles, but nothing was ever brought forward for anyone to actually see, test, or play. So the fans created something called Chrono Trigger Crimson Echoes. Square Enix, however, didn't support the action and issued a cease and desist. The game was nearly done when they stopped it. It was 98% complete. They didn't want just anybody releasing that game. Will there ever be a new Chrono game? I don't know. The fans remember it. The fans have not forgotten at all. Will its fate be a memory with no new media? Who knows? Maybe we'll see a new Chrono game in the future. I might have missed some details. I might have got a few things wrong. Comment and let me know if I did. Thanks for watching.